to the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Internet. I'm not actually Mark Cashman or even Chris McNulty. This is Jeff Teeper sneaking to the studio, taking over this episode introduction to let you know about our upcoming SharePoint Conference 2019 in May. We are gearing up to share a lot of news and best practices, and of course have awesome community activities at the SharePoint Conference like we've always done. The team and I are so fired up. We've got, of course, information about SharePoint that we're going to share with you, but more broadly about Microsoft 365 and the connections with OneDrive and Office and Teams and Yammer and Stream and Power Apps and Flow and just a whole bunch more. So this is going to be the best SharePoint conference we've done yet. I can't wait for you to see what we're working on and see you at the event. Have a great time. And I'm going to hand it back to Chris and Mark for the rest of the show.
Chris, did you hear something? Or was that you doing an impression of Jeff Teeper?
I was down the hall grabbing a drink. And no, not only do I not have an impression of Jeff, even if I did, I don't think anyone needs to hear it.
I swore I heard Jeff talking, and he was talking about the SharePoint conference, and I thought, man, you've nailed his voice.
No, I think it's sort of like Beetlejuice. You say SharePoint, SharePoint, SharePoint 3 times, and Jeff appears. So Jeff has now been on the Intrazone not just once,
but twice. Shazam.
And Jeff, just a warning and a reminder, if you come on the show 5 times, there's a special prize for members of the 5 Timers Club.
Ooh, I like that. We'll have you back 3 times and then big prize. We'll figure out what that is.
So the one thing I did overhear, or not overhear more particularly, is where to go to register. We know that we're getting closer and closer than ever to SPC 19. If you'd like to come, please jump on the interwebs and register at sharepointconference.com.
All right, so not to confuse who we are, I'm Mark Cashman, not Jeff Teeper, not doing Jeff Teeper's voice, and I'm here with my co-host, Chris, not doing an impression as well, McNulty.
Thank you very much. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the first things that we see with customers as they're moving to the cloud. What are they considering? What are the workloads they're selecting? And how to complement their move to the cloud with being able to bring things in with search? And what are some of the best practices that organizations see in their first year being cloud connected?
All right, joining us today are Daryl Bowden and Meryl Sanders from Love's Travel Stops and Country Stores, and then Matthew McDermott from Spanning Clouds Apps. He's a principal technical marketing engineer.
And also an Office Server and Services MVP.
Yes, somebody that we've known for quite some time.
Because we really want to recognize and share with our audience things that we hear about from our customers and things that we get to observe when we see what's changing in the service as they're coming onto the cloud. And also what organizations discover once they've tackled that first wave of cloud adoption. What is the second wave?
But let's talk first about what are some of the first things that people do when they think about that hurdle of, moving to the cloud and they actually start to take that step. What are some of the tactical things that they do? We know that almost everybody moves their email and calendar.
Well, it's funny, because I used to, at conferences, ask a trick question, like, show of hands, how many folks here think that Exchange and Outlook are the first workload? And how many people think that SharePoint and OneDrive are the first workload? Because the trick question is, it's identity.
Yes.
It's always the first workload.
Single sign-on, SSO. And, when you talk to a really good consultant or anybody that's planning the cloud to do it in the right way, is the first thing to get right is your Active Directory and to get your authentication service or server connected to the cloud, whether you move it to the cloud or you do ADFS, federate with the services on premises. But to make sure that you have that in good health. If your forests are in good health, then when you move and migrate people and their activities, when they're actually starting to hit the service first, which then maybe goes all the way down to on-premises, if single sign-on is not in good health, then all the other services really feel a little clunky.
That's right. A couple of years ago, we were doing conference presentations about how to move to the cloud. One of the easiest workloads to set up is to take Active Directory and run AD-Sync, DirSync, all the different utilities that we have to be able to synchronize your on-premises Active Directory with Azure Active Directory. And so that is one of the first workloads that we see coming in. The thing that we then see coming on in that realm later on is we're seeing a lot of organizations who are starting to unplug on-premises and live solely within the realm of Azure Active Directory, which is a really interesting thing because once you move to cloud as your primary identity, it makes it even simpler for you to stitch up other services, including shockingly non-Microsoft services, to be able to see your Azure AD identity as being essential for how you move back and forth. And if you need to integrate some of those third-party services into Microsoft 365, it makes it so much simpler.
So I think the good thing to see about how at least we know when you get it right is what we've done within the service. We have a lot of applications that talk to other applications, or as people move from one app to the other, we want that to be the best experience possible. And again, clean out your house on premises, but if you move to the cloud, do a good job of how you authenticate. There's a lot of best practices on how to do it. And I think from a service perspective, if you see switching from OneDrive to SharePoint or to Outlook on the web or OneNote on the web, whatever app you might be in, you should have a really nice experience, not to be prompted with creds, to feel like you are a first-party person when you're signed in through a web browser, or the applications themselves if you have desktop or mobile apps as well.
So it's interesting. I mean, just logging into the cloud is cool, but you need to have something more because few people are happy just staring. Congratulations, you successfully logged in.
Hey,
to Office 365.
You are who you said you are.
You want something to show up in the app launcher, the waffle that's just in the upper left-hand corner.
So let me ask you a question. I know that you probably did some cloud activity that was more of your personal thing, so your personal email, your calendar, work-oriented, wherever you may have stored your documents and your use of SharePoint. When you started to move to the cloud, besides that success of signing in, yay, the benefits, that you started to see, whether it was for you as an individual or because your roles in the past obviously spanned the benefits of a lot of people in the company. Moving that, core workload of email calendar, it's usually a no-brainer. Moving that to the cloud, Exchange has done a wonderful job of being Exchange on-prem or in the cloud. Like, you tell me, where do you want to be? It's very similar. But when they start moving other core workloads, where do they put their documents? Where do they manage their tasks from? Where, of course, do they manage their sites and portals? What was that maybe for you with a CTO type role? And then certainly, coming into Microsoft as an employee, just having those benefits of having those workloads in the cloud.
So the first wave was really messaging, right? Being able to send and receive emails and make it very simple for people to be able to connect their mobile devices. Because fundamentally, you can still connect a mobile device or an external web browser to an on-premises Exchange server, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's a commodity utility in the cloud. It's like, where is it? Sign up. And on premises, it requires a lot more care for you to build the same level of security and proxy that we would give you automatically in the cloud. So just being able to have that ubiquitous always-on email service, something that we probably take for granted, certainly in Microsoft, we take that for granted at this point, is a huge shift in how people communicate. Just fundamentally, the fact that your email is always on, that you have a way to get to your email at 6 o'clock at night or at 8 o'clock in the morning. There can be cons with that as well as pros, but that's usually the biggest shift that we see happening in organizations in their first way of moving to the cloud.
So there's a lot of good diagnostic tools. We'll certainly, if maybe for this episode, we'll put in links for people to go out and find those. But it's definitely a balance where I think people will find, especially customers that have been using SharePoint for a while, that leading at the edge of what you can move pretty quickly is a pretty high percentage of content, sites, and portals, and, of course, files. That small percentage, though, does take time. And I've got one trivia question for you. Microsoft Web, something that's actually been in the cloud for quite some time, but on our classic infrastructure, is soon to move to the modern portals infrastructure, so our modern communication stack. Can you guess what were the last two things that they were waiting for to be modernized?
Intrazone podcast subscriptions.
Yep.
And SharePoint conference registrations.
You nailed it. So we're waiting. We'll just wait while people sign up and subscribe.
Right.
No, the last two things were mega menus, which are now rolling out into production. So they're starting to adopt that fully for Microsoft, and the weather widget.
Really?
They had built a custom weather widget that was really sitting on their backlog of, we really, really need that because people around Microsoft around the world were looking for that information on the portal.
So we've talked about identity. We've talked about messaging and calendaring. We've talked about files, small and large, and we've talked about portals. But there is another workload which we really have to talk about because it's part of cloud transformation, and that's the entire range of Skype to Teams migration. Because that's one thing that we see, especially if organizations have made heavy investments in Link server on premises and Skype on premises, especially if they've gone in with telephony, there's a lot of care that's taken in kind of just shifting that basic phone service to being something which is cloud hosted as opposed to being locally hosted. But obviously long-term benefits and cost of ownership and so on and so forth. And Teams in particular, being able to be that digital hub that sits across all of Office 365 provides a great way not to integrate all of those other workloads and experiences in with calendaring and files and sites, but also to be able to give the people in the cloud something they hadn't had before, because it's the synthesis of meetings and chat and files and all those sorts of things combined in that ecosystem of Teams that really helps people able to build off of just the base level services and create those transformative apps and results that they're looking for.
I think before we wrap up, when we start moving into some discussion, you've been places, you've been traveling, and you've been talking to a lot of people.
I've been everywhere, man.
So, but with the context of what we're talking about, this sort of early phase move to the cloud and then sort of what do you do next? What did you hear while you were on the road?
So it's interesting. Last week I spent 2 days with 3 non-U.S. government-affiliated financial institutions. We're very large. They have huge information estates, and they're at 3 different stages in their adoption. One is just planning and trying to decide on what will go to Office 365. One is midstream, and the other is late stages. They've already moved everything to Office 365, and they're trying to build additional capabilities on top of it. But there were 4 things that were common threads there, and this is talking about what those late-stage cloud movements look like. The first is scale. Like, what are the best practices for being able to manage 50 million documents or 300 million documents once they're already in the cloud? What does it look like, in the case of one institution, when you have 420,000 site collections already? Like, how should they plan for the future?
Gulp.
Right. Second, what are the best practices around testing? We make a lot of resources available through both patterns and practices as well as through our online support and content sites, trying to make sure we're guiding them in the best ways that they can consume the updates that we give and let them test in their own realm. Along with that, there's much more interest once you get all the content in, not just the collaborative content, but all the content in, is how do you transform your management regime? How do you transform compliance and retention and DLP and all those sorts of things so that you have an integrated approach to security and compliance as well as to teamwork? And the last common theme we heard about there is once you have everything in there, how can we synthesize it not just for teamwork, but for knowledge? And some of these institutions have 60 to 70 years of digital content that they've assembled in off-cloud repositories. And they don't just want to get it there to make it searchable, but they want to get it there to make it usable so that in some cases these projects that they were involved with 50 years ago, obviously the staff who chartered that is probably no longer with the institution, but it's important for them to know, like, where was the road work? What were the financial arrangements made when we started this to make sure that that is sustained as a living, breathing asset, not just as a frozen archive.
All right. Now on to our conversation with Daryl Bowden and Meryl Sanders from Loves. And stay tuned to the second half of the show when we talk with Matt McDermott, who will explain this whole concept around 93 and 197 days.
I thought the answer was always 42.
It is 42. Matt thinks differently.
But that'll be coming up today on the InfoZone.
All right, I have the pleasure of sitting down here while we're in Branson, Missouri at the North American Collaboration Summit with Daryl Bowden and Meryl Sanders from Loves. And I love to just say Loves, but when you talk for the first time, we should mention that it's Loves Travel Stops and Country Stores. So welcome to the show. Daryl, first just tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe a little background about what Loves does in the public space and, of course, how you manage what you do in the public space from an IT perspective.
Sure. First, thanks, Mark, for having us on. My name is Daryl Bowden. I'm a manager of business systems around workforce technology for Loves, mostly around our corporate intranet, collaboration, productivity solutions for employees is mostly what we do in my group. We do a few other things along with that. Loves as a company, we have about 24,000 employees, mostly scattered in our retail stores across the country in North America. and probably 2,500, 3,000 employees in Oklahoma City and Houston amongst our companies. So we're a medium-sized company in the retail sector. We serve truckers at our truck stops, as well as the traveling public as well. We do the gas, you can imagine, but we have a lot of merchandise in the stores we do, along with tire care and storage and hotels and other things all around the traveling people.
And I'll tell you, I'll put a link to a photograph, or we'll put it into the blog as well, that showcases what does Loves look like from, the 300 or 400 feet away as you're driving on the interstate. It's very vibrant. Obviously, you chose very visual colors of yellow and red with the heart sign and everything. So we'll make sure people know that we're talking about, what you have on the highway experience, and you pull off and getting gas and getting all the things that you need to replenish and get back onto the highway. But of course, there's a lot to that, not just making that a great experience for the customers. Before we get too far, Merrill, if you can introduce who you are and what your role is in this craziness that you guys do at Loves.
Sure. So Merrill Sanders. So I'm a senior app development administrator. So primarily my team's responsible for a lot of the back-end management of the systems, web services, with the different application services that we're using, whether it's SharePoint or whatever tool we have out there. So we basically help keep the back-end systems running, make sure the collaboration's happening, I guess, from a technical perspective, and kind of working on that piece, kind of supporting the whatever business needs.
Thank you for being here today. I want to kind of set the stage as far as what state you're in, not just the state of Missouri and Oklahoma, and you said throughout the North America, but the state that you're in from an IT perspective. You're on a journey to the cloud, as I understand it. And from what do you have in your toolkit? I just made some notes. We're talking Windows 10, Office 2016, and Microsoft 365, the E3 license, which if you look across what does that actually offer you to do, it gives you a huge toolkit. So Daryl, first, when you think of what you had and where you were a year or two ago, just take us through that journey of the move to the cloud. I know you're not fully there, but in terms of the company intranet, some of the assets that you've moved and maybe some of the folks that you've worked with from a partner perspective. But first, from the broader intranet perspective.
As a company, Loves is slow to move to the cloud. Mostly has been on premise. I would say probably, and even a year and a half, 2 years ago, we started opening up the willingness to move to the cloud and understanding the value of that. From an internet perspective, it's really no different than the other systems that we have at Loves. We discovered there's limitations to being on premise. There's servers to maintain, and there's lack of mobility from our perspective. The mobility thing really drove us to the cloud. We want the content to be more accessible. We want a better user experience. And so we started about a year and a half ago with what do we have with our internet? Where can we improve it? And along with that, let's move it to the cloud. So what are our options there? And so, like I said, we started a year and a half ago exploring that. And today, we are very close to getting to roll that out. We hope to do that this year, a new intranet in the cloud. I mean, we've worked with a lot of partners along the way to get there. So I don't know if you want to go into the
Yeah, I'd love to understand. I know
Sure.
From what we've talked about and to share with everybody, there have been a number of different partners. So there have been, sort of your standard systems integrators, people that can sort of make it in the way that you want it. There's the accelerator type partners with the intranet. I believe you've worked with a couple of intranet partners. Yep. I think you mentioned Unily, you mentioned Powell 365, and very near and dear to the conference heart is, of course, the Pate Group, which is Mark Rackley and his team. So across the three of them, and then Merrill, after Daryl shares a little bit more, I'd love to hear it from now that we've got all that, when you think of applications in this modern cloud space. But first, Daryl, just working with those partners and the values that they brought.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start in the beginning. We brought in Sue Hanley to help us evaluate our intranet a year and a half ago. And she provided us an assessment and a recommendation on where to go. And just fabulous job there. A lot of value. It opened our eyes to a lot of things we were doing right and a lot of things we were doing wrong. And it confirmed for us that we needed to move our intranet to the cloud.
Just so you know, I've had those same conversations with Sue. Here's what you're doing right, Mark. Here's what you're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And I listened to every single thing.
It was awesome, but it was very humbling to say the least, but just awesome insight. And that led us to the Pate Group. And they've been with us over a year, guiding us through this process, not just with the intranet, but with Office 365 as well. And Microsoft on the infrastructure side and our infrastructure team and rolling out Windows 10 and all the things employees need to have, Windows 10, Office 365, Office 2016, in place before we can take advantage of some of the tools and services. Last year, we went through all of that. So there's a lot of partners on that side that helped us get to the point we are.
And so in asking you about partners and partnerships, you mentioned Microsoft, and not to go any more about it than across the other partners, but I know, just curious on your experience working with the local team. It wasn't just a buy and out the door, they say, we'll see you in 3 years. What is the experience? You leverage the Customer Immersion Center, working with our direct team. Obviously, they pull in partners at the right time. What was that Microsoft partnership? What was that like?
It's been really good from our perspective. And I think you need to look at it from two sides. One, our infrastructure team and the input that Microsoft gave them from this is what we do today infrastructure-wise. This is what we got to deal with. How do we get from here to the cloud? The advice there, the Immersion Center, as you mentioned, we went there several times. And on the business side, on our side, we did the same thing. We worked with different partners. We're working with one now. Our customer service manager is just phenomenal. And Microsoft has been wonderful with helping us with adoption around Teams, around all the other services, getting adoption and getting our employees educated on what's possible with Office 365. As you mentioned, we have the E3 license. We have a number of tools and services available that the company owns and we're all licensed for. So our job is to get that out there and support it. And Microsoft has really been there hand in hand with us to make that happen. And that's just, I can't say enough about it. It's really helped a lot. And we're really seeing that right now. I'd say over the last 3 or 4 months, when we hit the point infrastructure wise, we can start pushing out some of these tools like Teams. Mm-hmm. It's just been all in. So it's great.
So let's switch to talk about some of the applications. I think it's wonderful to hear that you're working well with Microsoft, great with the partners, and sort of as you need them, you will call upon them. But it sounds like it's a regular occurrence to meet with them. They know what you're doing now and maybe the guidance of where you want to go next. So use and adoption of stuff you have on the shelf is wonderful to hear. What are some of the things that you've taken off the shelf initially? And I mean that from a use and adoption perspective. I know that we'll, in just a moment, talk about what you're planning on doing next. So that's what's on the shelf right now. But what have you taken off the shelf? And Meryl, if you want to just talk about, you mentioned the application from your role perspective. What are some of those applications that you're pushing out, whether it's custom or off the shelf, like you mentioned, Microsoft Teams?
We do a lot with workflows. Obviously, workflows is a major piece that people are utilizing now for collaboration, document management, all types of things like that. So having the ability to use tools like Flow to go through and not have to have a developer create an application, from scratch and go through the whole process, but be able to do some of this stuff on our own. That's been extremely helpful for our power users, for different folks that are utilizing that piece. Looking at some other tools like Planner that's some availability out there and seeing how that can go and replace some of the things that are happening with Project. Or maybe you don't need to spin up an entire PWA site anymore. Maybe you can just utilize some of that stuff with Planner, even in Teams. It's definitely, it can kind of, just thinking off the head collaboration-wise, even recently, we were working on a PowerPoint presentation for a meeting we were working with and, building the entire thing in Teams and realizing we're collaborating with other people. And next thing you know, I've built this whole thing in Teams, and it's fantastic. It's definitely fantastic. Also mentioning with some of the, partners we've used, we've utilized the Power Manager piece, helping with the rollout, and working with those guys has been fantastic, and using those pieces to help speed up our process of getting the infrastructure out to the cloud. It's been absolutely great. Absolutely great.
I'm assuming that at some point, you train your users, and then of course you check in with your users. How's it going? With things like the Teams rollout, I don't know if this is pervasive across the company just yet, but from those that are either early adopters or if you're at full rollout, what is the reaction that you're getting from end users? And then maybe if you can spend time on, you shared kind of a use case of what you're doing in Teams. What are people doing in Teams? But first, maybe their take on it. Do they like it? And then what are they accomplishing?
Well, we mentioned the customer immersion experience that Microsoft helped us do just recently. They brought in some laptops, brought in 11 people from the company, and just basically started with Teams and showed some things. So I'll start there because the feedback we got from people that attended those, was, I'll say what I expected Very, very, very pleased. How can I get one of these? how can I? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And mostly it's around conversation and chatting. I would say it starts there with most people. I have a team. We use Skype, but there's limitations with Skype, and it's not as friendly because I don't have it on my phone. So I can't search it as well. So we sold it as that, and people are like, "Wow, this is great." And then we expect things like embedding a planner, having a meeting, putting your files out there, having your files in SharePoint, but accessible through Teams just very easily, and being able to get to it from any device. We expect that would really start to take off, and we've seen that. Our earliest adopter started using it in June of last year. Most groups in the company started using it December to January, February of this year.
Okay.
So it's kind of early, but that's some of the stuff we're already hearing about it.
Would you say that you've provided them, I know with the training through Microsoft, has there been an additional set of training for how you want people to leverage it or how you have configured it to roll out?
I think that's a great point. If you're going to roll out Teams, make sure you put a governance plan in place on Teams.
Sounds like you've talked to Sue Hanley. Oh, yes, we already know that.
Yes, absolutely.
Governance and a governance plan? Absolutely.
That's right.
And you could, right?
Definitely we could. And we collaborated on that with our infrastructure team, with our global admins for 365, with our AD and Exchange team, and everyone that's involved with 365, not just on the business side, but across the board on information security, can't leave off the security team, even the legal team, just making sure that everyone understands this is a communication platform. Employees are communicating this way. There's real live data out there. This is an enterprise tool, and it's going to take off. And so we put a governance plan in place. We put a support plan in place. We have a support page with content on our intranet site.
Sounds like you're getting organized. What's that all about?
We feel like we got that recommendation. We took it, and it has really, really paid off. And we do our own training. So when we get a request for Teams, we have a formal workflow in SharePoint for requesting Teams. And when we get a request, we always ask the question: do you know Teams? Do you want training? Mm-hmm. And we do training like once a week. We have a member of our team that does training on Teams, and we'll do that probably for the other tools as well. We roll it out from a technology standpoint. We're proving that you can have thousands of SharePoint site collections, with hundreds of people accessing them, and you can push documents to those through the cloud. We're getting ready to roll that out. We're doing testing, and it's working out.
Very nice.
And so I think that's a huge win for the solution for SharePoint and for O365 in general is our ability to do that.
Nice. Well, through the people that you work with, Microsoft, the partners, and then of course it sounds like you have a pretty good team as well, making sure that you have the right requirements and then you execute all the way through what Sue told you to do, through to actually people using it. So from the shelf, if I get it right, from the Microsoft 365 shelf, I know we're not the only player in your vendor pool, but we're talking Windows 10, Office 2016. We talked about Planner, we talked about SharePoint, and we talked about Microsoft Teams. What's up next, sitting on the shelf that's just begging and you can't wait to get to it? I've got the 4 listed here, but you talk off the top of your head. Where do you go next beyond that?
Well, I have to mention stream. Video is huge for us. We've tried a number of video solutions over the years, and we have videos that need to be brought back in-house. So we're very excited about the capabilities of the on-demand video and stream, and also the live streaming. Mm-hmm. This is also something that we want to use for different events in the company. With the live streaming is the live events in Teams. So I would say that would be number one for us that just really piques our attention is, hey, they just announced the availability of live events. Mm-hmm. We're testing that out now. So we're excited to use it.
Great. So I'll be curious to know, once you start using Stream, and I think you're right, it's across Teams, it's across, just there's a portal aspect to it, but there's a pervasive way of using and leveraging Stream because it's the backbone of a lot of those experiences. Well, it sounds like you've got the right plan to at least consider what should we do. It sounds like the art of the possible is at least getting you through that first hurdle. And obviously you're connected with a number of different and smart people that will help you know some things maybe you're not seeing because they attend a few more conferences or are connected to the right people. But it sounds like you're on the right track. And again, the thinking that I hear you talking about that we like to hear because it is our intent is to not keep selling you licenses. You need more of this, you need more of that. The value, especially from, again, the availability that you already have on the shelf, is to how can you configure out of the box or work with a good partner that can help you with just that little, cruff on top that's just a little icing to finish off what isn't there.
Right.
And to also be mindful of what's coming. So, not to build something before it's going to get delivered out of the box. You've given me a ton, obviously, to understand what it is that Loves does. I appreciate that you sharing your story. It makes me happy that you obviously have good partners and the Microsoft team is helping you a lot. Any final words where people can go and learn more about Loves or anything that you're doing as individuals or as a team, or your website? We'll make sure to put those in the show notes. Anything that you want to point people to?
You want to learn more about Loves and what we do, loves.com. And we're on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Thank you for your time, Meryl. Thank you for your time, Daryl. I hope you'll stick around and we'll do a couple of quick FAQs with both of you in addition to the rest of the folks on this episode.
All right.
Sure. Cool. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So in search of a search expert, we have come across one of our favorite MVPs who's been around quite some time. We will talk half about what he's known for, and then I certainly want to get into the half of what he may not yet be known for. But want to welcome to the show Matthew McDermott, or as I know him, Matt. So Matt is a Microsoft MVP, and he's currently working at a company called Spanning Cloud Apps. And in a deep breath, you are a Principal Technical Marketing Engineer.
Perfect.
First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is this Spanning company you now work for? And explain that title.
So Spanning is a cloud-to-cloud backup solution. We have 3 different products, one for Salesforce, one for G Suite, and one for Office 365.
I didn't catch that middle one.
It's the G. Yeah. And so I describe my role as the Office 365 technical guy on the product team. And I'm helping with product roadmap. I'm helping with working with the engineers to figure out what we're going to build next, talking to customers to figure out what they want us to build next. And sometimes I'll sit in on support calls and things like that because we have fantastic support agents, but sometimes somebody's doing something in Office 365 that they haven't seen before, and I'll go take a look and talk with the client about how they can use the product in a way that will protect them and use Office 365 in a way that will make them more efficient.
So today is a little bit more about backup, restore, security, and confidence in the service.
Absolutely.
But because we're going to chat with you kind of part 2 about search, give us a little bit of your search history. Why do people think of Matt as a search expert?
Well, I've been teaching about search for years. And with my my great friend, Agnes Molnar, we've been doing workshops at the various conferences. In fact, we just got back from the North American Collaboration Summit in Branson, where we did a successful workshop there.
I think I know a little something about it. I think I saw you there.
Yeah, I think I see you do. So we have been evangelizing using search in SharePoint originally, SharePoint on-prem, and then with Office 365 and the amazing advancements that we have with the search surfaces in Office 365, we've been teaching people how to use them better. So we still evangelize metadata. We talk about how to organize your stuff. I don't know how many different super hyper computers we're going to need to be able to organize and categorize some of the atrocious messes of file shares I've seen. But certainly when you migrate to the cloud, being organized, using metadata and things like that, it only makes search better. And so those are the kinds of concepts we've been teaching folks for years. And it holds true today, just like it did 10 years ago when we were working with the betas for SharePoint 2010.
Your role certainly is to listen. You know what the products can and can't do both on your side and our side.
Yeah.
And being an MVP, certainly you're plugged into not just for search, but you get access to the information protection team. And certainly I know you guys talk to our data center team. Absolutely. And you raise your hand about the good and the bad. So let's talk about cloud data protection.
Sure.
When I think of it as just backup. I'm backing up my content. And I've got the nice, the frame of mind of how to do it, and then the peace of mind that it's being done. But, we've chatted about it a little bit, but certainly I'm not the expert there. When you hear that, it's not just cloud backup, then what more is it?
Well, there's a lot of different business scenarios that we're trying to protect our users from. A real common one is I have a user leave the company, so we delete their Office 365 account. There might be an employee offboarding process, but ultimately, to salvage that license and save the company money, they delete the user. Within 30 days, Office 365 does what it's supposed to do. It initially, during that interim 30 days, it's called a soft delete. So the user's still there, can be recreated, rehydrated, and the OneDrive and email come back. But if you don't, and you wait 32 days, the user goes away, and Microsoft does what they're supposed to do. They delete the content. So products like Spanning can protect companies from that deletion, either through error, or they realize 60 days after the employee left that the thing that they need was on his OneDrive. And so with products like Spanning, we can protect the user, we can protect the company from those kinds of micro disasters. Our product has a user interface that allows end users to do their own self-service restores. So instead of the IT department getting a help desk ticket that they have to do a full restore of a user's OneDrive so that they can get a document back, the user can go in and find that PowerPoint file that they deleted 6 months ago, 9 months ago, and restore it themselves as long as they're protected by Spanning. So we try to do a lot of different business cases that help companies protect their business, because Microsoft's job is to protect the data center and protect the servers in the data center. But it's stated very clearly that we own the content as users. As a company who has a tenant inside of Office 365, that data belongs to us. And so if we delete it, that's on us. So there's a level at which we have to tell Microsoft that's okay. It's okay to delete our stuff because we told you to, because we don't expect infinite retention of all of our stuff, and certainly don't want it. I think about the number of emails that I deleted today already, knowing that I want them deleted and gone because I just don't need them. We don't need infinite retention on all of that stuff.
Part of that is the lens of the user, certainly to the value of the company. And one of the things that I heard you say, and I've heard you say a couple other numbers, you said 30 days or 32 days for the user, and then deletion, and then there's awareness of that, but then there's also how do you recover from that with the backups, obviously. When you get into something that's broader of these policies, and sometimes based on how we build the tech, the other two important numbers are 93 days and 197 days.
Okay.
As specific as 32 days was, what is it about 93 days and 197 days that you want to get across?
So 93 days is the standard SharePoint recycle bin retention. So if I delete an item in Office 365 and SharePoint Online, that document or item will go into the recycle bin, and it will remain there for 93 days. Anytime during those 93 days, I can easily restore it right back to where it started. But after 93 days, the item is purged from the recycle bin. Now, Office 365 has an enormous recycle bin. When I compare it to what we used to have on-prem, where we had to manage the databases and we had to manage all of the storage, the recycle bin was part of the site quota. And so if you started bumping up against site quota on-prem, SharePoint started getting rid of things in the recycle bin. Well, it's not really an issue in Office 365. But once you get past the 93-day mark, the item does go away. And so that's where we come in again and offer to be able to have backups of those items beyond that 93 days. I think the 197-day number that you've seen came right out of my deck. And there was a study done, and I don't have the reference right away, but there was a study done that organizations, the average time to determine that an organization has had a malware attack or a malicious actor acting on them is 197 days. So if you think about 93 days for retention in the recycle bin, but 197 days to figure out that somebody came in and deleted all your stuff, whether it was an angry employee or less likely in Office 365 would be a hacker, the reason I say less likely is because Microsoft has done a great job protecting us from ransomware as well, particularly in OneDrive. So the client now detects massive changes locally and will stop synchronization and say, hey, did you mean to delete that 400 items out of your library? Did you mean to change the file extension on 400 files in your library? And it'll stop synchronization to the cloud until you interact with the client. I love that feature. The other side of it is that if for some reason you do allow that to happen and those files get synchronized to Office 365, you have files restore. And so for 30 days, I have a window of opportunity to go back to a single point in time, either for a single file or my entire OneDrive, and reset it to that point in time. That's fantastic. I think that's a really tremendous feature for nothing more than just having the peace of mind of knowing that I have that protection and that IT knows that they have that protection in Office 365.
And I would even take that into the Office applications. And this has happened to me a couple of times. You start to write some of these patterned, like I write a blog. And for my next blog, I just kind of make a copy and change the title and, kind of think through obviously lots of content changes, but the structure, is something that helps to just repeat. What has happened to me a couple of times is I forgot to create a new file. And I opened up one and I just started paving over everything that was there. Yeah. And then, of course, I saved it as new. And then what I was able to do is I could revert via a past version of that file and write back and recover my original one. And then, of course, now start with the new one.
Yep.
And, wipe the brow and I'm good to go.
Yeah.
So I know there's a lot of things that we're doing for end users, for awareness of, hey, do you mean to do this? If not, stop. Take that action. If something were to be deleted by accident or on purpose and you need to recover it, there's lots of ways to restore direct from the recycle bin, or you were mentioning the restore files. But if I were to ask the question, when somebody puts spanning on top, what further confidence does that give IT?
The first one that I always like to call out is end users can do their self-service restores. The second one is that IT also has controls to be able to see what in SharePoint has been protected, because we also protect SharePoint sites, documents associated with SharePoint sites, groups, and teams. We offer another feature to support IT, and that's, let's say that we hire Mark Cashman to come in and work for us for 60 days. So I license you, I give you a user account, I give you a OneDrive, and you do a bunch of work. Then once you leave, you have a subordinate come in and start doing similar work. I can restore your content across users. So I can take the OneDrive from that other user, Mark Cashman, and I can restore it into a new OneDrive. We call it a cross-user restore, but it allows us to onboard new users very quickly with content from a previous employee that may have been work in progress.
Oh, that's nice. I know that there's several steps that you could do to do that and certainly accomplish some of the same goals, but I could imagine it's not for the faint at heart to do it where you have to literally go and copy-paste all the files out before the OneDrive gets deleted.
Right.
And then restore.
And then if you think about from a compliance perspective as well, if I have a compliance officer that comes into IT and says, well, that guy Mark Cashman that just left, I want to see what he was doing on his OneDrive. Well, I can restore Mark Cashman's content into the OneDrive of the compliance officer or into a team site and allow the compliance officers to go through that and offboard my employees as well. And so it's just a lot of different scenarios for managing companies' content beyond the limits set by Office 365.
And it also does it where some of those equate to just a move or a migration of content, but in the context of the scenario. So it's not just available to anybody. Right. It's for the compliance officer. Once he gives the okay or she gives the okay, it moves into new employee.
Yes.
And maybe not all of the content.
Exactly.
Because there might be another part of the process where somebody says, yeah, Mark was doing a great job. This new person is not going to need half of that.
Maybe your employment contract is in there, and I don't want to include that with the content. So you can certainly pick and choose. Yeah,
certainly.
Absolutely.
So if we take this context of we've got a lot of content and we've got a lot of, obviously, confidence in the backup and restore nature of it across more than just the scenarios that come out of box. Now, if we switch to your search hat and this content is happy and not being deleted, and there isn't really that context to restore, but it's active content, but there's a plethora. We know the huge numbers of how many documents people are working on, how much people bring from file servers into the service.
Migration.
And even then, no matter what, even if it's greenfield, the growth and explosion of content in the cloud is huge. So people know kind of the small number of documents and project-oriented things that they're working on. But when it comes to that value of being able to repurpose what others are doing or do your research effectively by the nature of what other people are doing, it gets into that realm of search.
I like to split search into two things. One is I know what I'm searching for, and so that's the search experience. But then there's I know what I'm working on, and that's the discovery experience. And Agnes has a fantastic slide that she goes through where she talks about the difference between discovery, where it's I have a topic that I have in mind that I'm going to be doing some research on. So technologies like Delve are fantastic for that discovery aspect of it. for search, that's where I know what I'm searching for. Here's a couple of keywords. Tell me what I'm looking for. And those are the richer experiences that Microsoft Search is bringing to us.
Well, then let's balance the value of building against the AI in the background, the machine learning that's doing a lot of lifting,
right?
But still extended to what the human or the company decides to do. So with AI, we're doing a lot of trying to infer what something is.
Right.
This image that just got uploaded, it's a cheeseburger, or it's a this, it's a that, it's a car. Then there's, of course, the inheritance of, well, who's accessing it? Is it somebody who's closely working with me or somebody at a distance?
Right.
So there's that value of the Microsoft graph. Does that mean I can just get away with having people fill out forms and applying corporate-driven taxonomy type metadata terms? I think both improve search no matter what. The more we know about an entity, the easier it is to going to be find and use it. But how do you balance, especially when if you meet with a customer and give them your best practices?
Right.
AI is going to get you so far, and it's going to do so much without anybody having to do anything. But if you only were to leave it at that and you were highly dependent on a good search environment, how do you balance the two?
Well, the balance is really hard because ultimately we're coming down to metadata, whether it's tagged by the people in the organization or tagged by the AI that's ambient to the document. We still need the metadata in order for it to be relevant. Having a huge body of, even if it's a 27-page document with no images, that's a lot of information embedded in that document. The keyword that we would use to look for that document may not even be in the document itself. And that's the challenge that we have. So asking employees to tag data, asking them to do metadata, I think that you have to show them the search benefit, whether it's a group of salespeople who you're asking to put product documentation and product metadata on a document so that it shows up properly in the manager's dashboard. That's one way of doing that, is having the outcome is the contract that you just got signed shows up immediately on the dashboard of your boss. So you get a kudo for signing that contract, but it doesn't show up if you don't tag the document. And I think that's an important, I'm the youngest of 6 kids. My mom's a marriage, family, child counselor. I tend to use her skills a lot when I'm talking to clients about how to manage the workforce that's supposed to be managing the documents. We try to show the mutual benefit to that. In a perfect world, my AI would be trained just like the photo AI. Okay, so if I can show the AI 27 different dog breeds and tell them this is a golden retriever and this is a Labrador retriever, and then have it look at 500 different photos and come up with the documents or come up with the right tags for each of those breeds, and the 10 that it got wrong, I can say, this one's not right, this one's not right, this one's not right, and tag those correctly. And now I get 99% accuracy in my photos. Why can't I do that for documents? Why can't I give it 27 contracts and have it and tell it exactly how I would tag those 27 contracts, and then have it try on 10 more, and then continue to train it and improve it to the point that that metadata becomes relevant for my organization?
I think I have an answer for you. With one model, with a lot of images coming through, you use cognitive services, correct?
Right.
With the use case scenario that you're describing across these different breeds, maybe you should be leveraging dognitive services.
Cognitive services.
Which I think is a new service that's offered through Microsoft, the graph.
I absolutely think I need to look into that one.
Well, let's jump into, besides just fun punnery, a scenario where, let's say, AI is working for you. You've got people that are willing to fill out metadata, or you've got librarians that are tasked with doing that, and they're doing it right. From an end user perspective, because on this episode and this show all up, we really like to focus on the value to the user. Right. If that's all in place, what are good search practices as an end user? Whether it's in the discovery mode or if it's in the I know what I'm looking for mode. What are good ways to, if you know good search is in place, how to use it?
I think probably the best way to start is titling your documents correctly. So not using cryptic file names like you used to do on the file shares, not using a date in the title to indicate this is a new version of the document. So you have 27 copies of the document in a document library. If you think about it, every time you rev that document, it should be a SharePoint version, and not a new document version. Because otherwise, the search indexer just views them all as essentially equal, and it has no way to rank. So I have people telling me I have 27 of these Excel spreadsheets, and every month I just create a new copy of it. Well, search doesn't really know what the difference is between those spreadsheets, so it's always going to give you poor results.
Okay.
It'll make a best guess. So titling them, using version control the way that you should in Office 365, things like that will really help. Using your own custom metadata can help as well. So anytime you're using metadata, it only makes search better, and making sure that the metadata is accurate. I've seen cases where people use default metadata to try to ease the pain of having too much metadata. And then what you end up with is all the documents are tagged exactly the same because nobody's paying attention to the defaults.
I got it.
And then I love the integration with Outlook for my calendar. Agnes and I were doing our workshop on a Saturday, and the demo data doesn't have appointments on Saturday because it's a demo of a business. So the demo on Friday, I had to make the joke, the demo on Friday looks way better than the demo on Saturday because it shows you your calendar. When you Bing me, it shows me my calendar. It shows me who I report to and the interactions I've had with the people that I report to. And that's a really powerful capability to have it baked right into, I see it as it's a lanyap. It's a benefit, it's a little side benefit to having Microsoft Search empowered in your tenant is you get it outside the tenant too.
I like it. Well, I'm going to use your example of the weekend to get to our last topic, which is there's one more thing that I think Matt's pretty well known for. And I don't know if you only do it on the weekends, but when you're doing it, it certainly is no longer work. And the one thing I know about you that I think anybody who's interested in anything that you do, and we'll say this on behalf of the Interzone listeners, tell us a little bit about your dog stories. You've had a couple of really special dogs in the past that do some really special, amazing things.
Yeah.
So I would love it if you would share one Ruby story.
Okay. So I'll give just a little bit of backstory. So I've been a dog lover my whole life, but when I moved to Austin, the number one thing my wife and I wanted to do is have a dog. And I had an amazingly special dog named Willa. And she and I had a 12-year career as a search and rescue dog team. And so we responded to events like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Ike in the South. We also did work for the Austin Police Department, actually wore Austin Police Department uniform because we were on their search and rescue team for a number of years, and have done work for San Antonio Police Department, San Antonio, the Bexar County, which is the county that surrounds San Antonio, as well as the FBI down there. And so just an amazing career. She was an amazing girl. When I got Ruby, my intention was to have her be my next search and rescue dog. That didn't work out. My jobs changed, and Ruby got sick at one point that required us to treat her for about a year. She's fine now. She's 10 years old. She thinks she's a puppy. She's an amazing dog. But she's very, very intuitive, and she knows human speech because we have always used complete sentences when we talk to our dogs. So she knows the difference between different words and the orientation of those words in the sentence. And it was really funny. I had a friend come over, and when my wife and I have my best friend who takes care of Ruby when I'm off doing things like coming to speak on the Intrazone, Ruby loves going there because she loves Uncle Brent and Aunt Gina, and she loves their dog Oso. Oso is also Ruby's boyfriend. And so he has several names, and we have to spell his name sometimes, but now she's figured that one out. So now we use Bear generically, or BEAR, or the boy. And those are some of the words that we can use around her, and she doesn't quite pick up that he's coming.
What? Is going now? We're going now? Going now?
Yeah, we going now?
Ooh.
So one night, I was having a friend come over. Another MVP was in town, and I was having him over for dinner. And we went through the motions of, making guacamole, getting the house ready, vacuuming, making sure that the house is cleaned up. And these are all things that we do when Bren and Gina are coming over with Oso. And so Ruby goes to the window. As soon as I broke out the avocados to make guacamole,
Is he here?
She immediately knows he's coming. And so when my friend showed up, Ruby, I'm not kidding, she went out the front door, looked, and then looked around my friend because this was not the human she was expecting. And so he came in the door and greeted her, and she was lovely and greeted him and was very happy. But then she went to the window and laid down and sighed.
Oh.
And she's waiting because she thought that her boyfriend was coming. So later on we're talking, and I finally said, Rob, I have to explain to you what happened. Ruby thought that her BOYFRAND was coming, and he's not. And so now Ruby's sitting with us. And he looked at me and he goes, she knows what boyfriend is? And she stands up and goes in the other room and looks out the window again. So
That's
I urge
awesome.
you to use complete sentences around your dogs. It just makes it's a delightful experience to have a dog that knows the difference between, where you're going, what you're doing, and they pick up on that. They're that intuitive.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you just gave me an idea for a title of the show or something that will revolve around rescuing, because I think you rescue your users and customers in getting them to think, a good way to do and work with their content so it works for them. And I certainly know that with dogs, certainly the ones that you've had, they help rescue other people.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to go out on a limb here. You can tell them if I'm right or wrong. But they certainly have rescued you from the way that I hear you tell stories.
No doubt about it.
That's really awesome.
Changed my life.
So, Matt, thank you for coming on the show. I can't wait till the end of the show to hear what your FAQ is these days. But again, thanks for coming on the Intro Zone.
My pleasure. Thanks, Mark.
Apart from the Intrazone, which we know is your number one home for learning about what's coming and what's new with SharePoint and Office 365, going into the community is the best way to amplify that learning with other members of the community. And that's why we're really happy to focus on some of the events coming to a city or town near you.
So we start with SharePoint Saturdays. These are exceptional opportunities for users, IT, developers to learn and engage with their local community. And often a lot of experts fly in to support the SharePoint Saturdays. Best part I always say is they're free. Just so you know, they're still free. So coming up, if you visit spsevents.org, you'll find a number of SharePoint Saturdays coming up, and we'll name a few here. On April 20th, Boise, Idaho, that will be at the St. Luke's Anderson Center. On April 27th in Doha on the Microsoft campus of Qatar. This is the first SPS Qatar, so don't miss it if you're in that region, or maybe that's worth flying out to Qatar for the first time. It is the first SharePoint Saturday in that area. Maybe it's your first trip there. And on May 4th in the suburbs of Chicago at the DeVry University. On, of course, May the 4th be with you. Follow hashtag SPS ShyBurbs or follow at SPS Chicago Burbs, and you will find out all that's going on in Chicago and, of course, in SharePoint. So go join and support. Go Cubs!
Some would say go Sox. And as a Bostonian, you can always say go Sox.
Look, when I have you in the studio and I get it right, please at least give me some kudos.
High five right there.
High five.
SharePoint Fest coming up in Washington, D.C., April 29th to May 3rd. Microsoft will be there. This is a great place, especially if you're dealing with federal or government sector. There's a lot of focused content coming up there.
Then there, of course, is the biggest one that our friend Jeff led the show off with. So he kind of called out a few things already that we usually cover about the SharePoint conference. But if you're on Twitter, always follow hashtag SPC19. Know that this is a huge show on May 21st to the 23rd at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Tons of speakers, tons of sessions. Of course, Jeff and his crew are getting ready to give a great executive keynote. And you and I, Chris, will have a special recording of the Intrazone live on stage, just like a regular session. But of course, it's going to be live and published afterwards.
Except with people there to see for themselves all the mistakes that we made that are edited out through the miracle of studio production work.
That's right. How many times do we go, Lisa, can you lift that? Just lift that last part out. So like you heard us talk about at the early part of the show, go to register at sharepointconference.com.
Following up on that, across the pond, European Collaboration Summit 2019, be held in Wiesbaden, Germany, May 27th to 29th. Register now at collabsummit.eu.
Then later in the summer, June 10th through the 11th in Atlanta, Georgia, is the Microsoft Business Applications Summit. You can go to Microsoft.com/Business Applications Summit, and you'll find all things that are going to be at that conference. Dynamics 365, Power BI, Excel, Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, Mixed Reality, and guess what? It's all under one roof.
And if all those events don't give you an answer to your problem, there's always FAQ coming up next on the Intrazone.
So here we are at that part of the show that I have become personally very much connected to, because I just like hearing what other people think, especially about things that I don't know about. So we'll start. Chris, tell me something that I don't know. What is your most frequently asked question these days?
So a question I was asked 4 times last week. For new administrators, where's the best place to go to learn about what updates are coming up into their service? And our standard answer is to go into the Office 365 Admin Center, but particularly for the SharePoint and OneDrive audience, we want to recommend the newer update to the SharePoint Admin Center, which gives you a SharePoint and OneDrive focused view of all of the upcoming features and enhancements in the service. As we're blessing them to start moving into targeted release, you'll get a notice right there. You can also pick that up inside of the Office 365 Admin app for your mobile device.
And part of your job is to sit in on the weekly Red Room, which is the special juice where it says what is actually rolling out, what do we need to start communicate. And I know that you attend so that you're doing your part on good change management.
Thank you.
Matt, what questions are people asking you these days? What's that one question that boils up to the top of your most frequently asked question? And of course, what do you say after you've kind of heard their question?
Well, we just did the conference in Branson, and I do a lot of content around search. So a lot of the questions I get is about search. And I'm still getting questions from people asking me, what's the difference between a crawled property and a managed property? And why should I even care? My answer is that the crawled property is when the SharePoint search engine comes by and sees your new columns, the columns that you just added to a list, and it keeps a list of those itself internally. The managed property is the one that search uses to find that content. So there's 800 and something out of the box managed properties in SharePoint, but you can add more if you want. And so the example that I always give is if I let 3 different people create a list for customers, and there's a customer ID on the list, and one of them is customer ID with no space, another is customer ID with a space, and the third is cust ID because that's a developer and they wanted to save a couple of bytes.
It's probably whack cust ID.
Yeah. Then you can create your own managed property called customer ID, and you can map it to those 3 crawled properties to be able to return content from all 3 lists. And so managed properties help solve that problem, plus give you the ability to query and return that data to the search interface so that you can show that customer ID in the search result.
I've always loved that there's that ability to, no matter how things got started or where things are at currently, is you can reel in that social aspect of how people are thinking about listing their content with the managed way that doesn't erase either.
Right.
There's the value of both as long as you can map it so that it makes sense that when somebody gets a search result, they're not seeing the Wild West. They're actually still seeing, here's the story we want to tell about what this content is.
Precisely.
Which is great.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's a good way to put it.
So, Meryl, start with you. What is your most frequently asked question these days? And, of course, what do you tell people?
Certainly. So, using Microsoft Teams, obviously you've got your channel so you've got your main team and then lots of channels. And people are communicating and elaborating in the channels. And the question I ask is, can everyone see this? Are there any private channels? And so there's, at this point in time that I'm aware of, there's not quite private channels, but what we have been telling people is they can actually start a group chat with multiple members, which basically becomes private in a sense. But then what they can also do is pin that chat to the toolbar on the top left side of Teams, and then you can also rename it. So in that sense, I have one specific for my team, and really it's just a chat, but for us it's a private channel that we utilize, and it works very well and searchable, and you can always come back to it.
That is a excellent, I would say, workaround at this point, because we have announced that we're going to be doing private channels, or the Microsoft Teams team has said that. So more to come from them, not anything we're going to break here, but just the value of what you just said. Isolate a few people, whether you're thinking security or not, but it's just a consolidated, set of folks on a certain topic, and then to be able to go to that and have it be, pinned as a favorite at the top. Super easy to do. I have done that as well. And I love that you give that as like, just do this, try that. And by the way, you can do this today. You don't have to wait for private channels. When private channels come, they'll solve a few extra little security hurdles. But great FAQ. Thanks. Daryl, what is something that you're getting asked a lot these days?
One question that we get a lot is, I have files or lists that I want to share with people outside the company. How can I do that? We don't really have that solution. So with the 365 tools, we have a few options. We have chosen to go with SharePoint external sites, which allows very granular control, because that's the second question that they ask is, I want to share this, but how do I control that? You can do that with SharePoint online sites. You can also do that with Teams. You can have external people access your Teams, and you can also do that with OneDrive. You can share files with OneDrive. Our company has chosen one route, but we always put the 3 out there, and we want to get feedback from employees because maybe we change that one day and allow people to share content and chats and conversations with external members. But it's a frequent question I get.
I think it is a frequent question, and I'm glad that you tackle it as well, because it would certainly come back to us as well. I think by the nature of how we're building it and how I heard you mindfully rolling it out, not just this feature, but certainly everywhere, that at a document level, you can share a document, certainly at a site level, but throughout the whole group connected experience, to have a guest in Teams means they can participate in the chat, they can participate in files, view or edit, and beyond that, certainly planner tasks can be assigned to them once they're a member. They really are a member like any other. Right. But it is something, back to your governance plan, this is usually where people get a little hesitant about external sharing, is absolutely you're going to external share at some point in time. Do you want that to be done in email? Probably not. Or correspondence in email is fine, but documents, sites, whatnot. So we certainly are trying to build the tools against a governance plan that you can put together at lots of different levels, and to be mindful that it's not just one way. There is things that you might do just with a file that you happen to be managing in your OneDrive. And then from an IT perspective, not to steal any of your thunder, but I think it is what I heard you say. There is a spigot that you can decide, are we going to external share or not? I think it's more of, do we external share or not? If you do, like almost everybody, how are we going to do it, and in what tools do we want to enable it? And it's not an all on or all off switch. That's the other thing, that there's a lot of control that you can put in place of who can share externally, when they're in, what can they do and what can they not do. So great FAQ. I love that you tackle that. It means that fewer emails that come our way. But it's great to take advantage of it also in a mindful rollout. What are people doing? And if we see anything that, isn't quite right, to be able to tweak and adjust that. Yeah. Excellent.
Thanks, Mark. And I also want to thank Daryl, Merrill, and Matt for also sharing what you brought here today. Remember, if there is a question that you haven't heard answered already on the show, please write to us through the broadcast or find us at one of our upcoming events, and we may feature your question in a future edition of the IntraZone.
Thank you to our guests, Daryl Bowden and Merrill Sanders from Loves and Matt McDermott from Spanning.
Check out our show page for links to all of what was discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/The IntraZone.
If you'd like to reach out with questions or feedback for the SharePoint teams, email us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or out on Twitter at SharePoint, at @mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Tell all your friends and colleagues about the show. Subscribe at your local Major League Baseball stadium or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks so much for listening and putting up with every single sports thing that Chris does. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman, Jeff Teeper, and Chris McNulty, and you've been listening to The IntraZone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.